Hello everyone! Welcome to English Revision with Mr. Johnston. Today, we are looking at our second extract from Chapter 4. In this extract, we are introduced to Soho, the district in which Hyde lives. This video is going to answer the following questions. How does Stevenson convey London's shock after Carew's murder? In what way is Soho a reflection of Hyde? And how does Stevenson demonstrate that London may not be as civilised and respectable as it seems? Before we begin, you may be interested in downloading my free resource for this extract. Click a link in the description box below this video to download this resource for free. It comes complete with writing tables for taking notes, short writing tasks, and exemplar paragraphs. Let's now summarise our extract. You may remember from our last extract that Hyde has just murdered an old man. The police find the old man's body and discover a letter addressed to Utterson in his hand. Utterson arrives to the scene and identifies the body as Sir Danvers Carew. Carew was a well-known member of Parliament. His death would therefore be shocking to London society. Now, you may remember that the maid witnessed this crime. She tells the police that Mr. Hyde was the murderer. So the next morning, Utterson and a police inspector travel across London to arrest Hyde. A strange fog has descended upon the city, covering it in darkness. Utterson and the police inspector travel to Soho. This is a district in which Hyde lives. It is a disreputable area, full of poverty, crime, and immorality. To skip our reading of this extract, jump to 4 minutes 11 seconds. It was by this time about 9 in the morning, and the first fog of the season. A great chocolate-coloured pall lowered over heaven, but the wind was continually charging and routing these embattled vapours, so that as the cab crawled from street to street, Mr. Utterson beheld a marvellous number of degrees and hues of twilight. For here it would be dark, like the back end of evening, and there would be a glow of a rich lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration, and here, for a moment, the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. The dismal quarter of Soho, seen under these changing glimpses, with its muddy ways and slatternly passengers, and its lamps, which had never been extinguished, or had been kindled afresh to combat this mournful reinvasion of darkness, seemed, in a lawyer's eyes, like a district of some city in a nightmare. The thoughts of his mind, besides, were of the gloomiest dye, and when he glanced at the companion of his drive, he was conscious of some touch of that terror of the law and the law's officers which may at times assail the most honest. As the cab drew up before the address indicated, the fog lifted a little and showed him a dingy street, a gin palace, a low French eating-house, a shop for the retail of penny numbers and 2-penny salads, many ragged children huddled in the doorways, and many women of different nationalities passing out, key in hand, to have a morning glass. And, the next moment, the fog settled down upon that part, as brown as umber, and cut him off from his blackguardly surroundings. This was the home of Henry Jekyll's favourite, of a man who was heir to 250,000 sterling. We will now analyse our passage. This video is going to answer the following question. How does Stevenson create a tense atmosphere in this extract? Let's begin with our first idea. Stevenson presents London as a city that is shocked and in grief after Carew's murder. Now, Stevenson uses pathetic fallacy throughout this extract to convey these feelings of shock and grief. Pathetic fallacy is a literary device in which an author describes nature, often the weather, in order to create a particular mood. For example, in a story, after something really good happens to a character, the weather might turn sunny. The sunny weather reflects the happy mood of the character. Here's another example. If a character feels very angry, the weather might turn stormy. The stormy weather reflects the character's angry mood. Now, in this extract, Stevenson describes the darkness, fog, and wind to convey London's feelings of shock and grief after Carew's murder. So, let's take a look at our first quotation. Utterson sees a chocolate-coloured pall descend from the sky and cover the streets. In other words, fog now covers the city. But I'm interested in this word, pall. A pall is the cloth that you place over a coffin in a funeral. Stevenson is thus describing the fog covering London in the same way as a pall covers a coffin. This imagery of death reflects the city's grief over Carew's murder. Let's take a look at a different example of imagery of death in our extract. Stevenson describes how a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling reeves. Now, let's first of all take a look at this phrase, a haggard shaft of daylight. In other words, the daylight is piercing through the fog. But let's zoom into this word, haggard. If you describe someone as haggard, you would be suggesting that their face looks thin and worn. A person would look haggard if they are exhausted or sick. Now here, Stevenson is describing the daylight looking haggard. The daylight looks pale and weak as it struggles to break through the thick fog. Now this imagery further creates an atmosphere of despair. Let's take a look at this next phrase, in between the swirling reeves. On one level, Stevenson is describing the fog here. But let's pay particular attention to this word, wreath. A wreath is an arrangement of flowers that are put onto a coffin. So the fog is covering the city in a similar way that a wreath might cover a coffin. Together, these descriptions create the impression that nature itself is mourning Carew's death. This sense that nature is grieving over this crime is also seen in the description of the mournful re-invasion of darkness. Now, the fact that the district is experiencing darkness in the morning is striking. The morning is often symbolic of hope and optimism. But on the morning after Carew's death, the sun can hardly be seen. London remains in darkness. This strange, unnatural darkness reflects the city's despair and hopelessness. Indeed, this visual description could also symbolize a spiritual invasion of darkness. The darkness is being described here as if it is an army that has invaded London. We are given a sense that goodness and light are retreating from a city after Carew's murder. Let's look at another example of this military terminology. The wind was continually charging and routing these embattled vapours. In other words, the wind is blowing the city's fog here and there. Now, I find the words charging and routing particularly striking here. These are examples of military terminology. They're the sort of language that are used to describe a battle. To rout an army literally means to charge an army with such force that they retreat. So Stevenson seems to be describing a battle between the wind and the fog here. It is as if nature is at war with itself. Now, this description seems to suggest that there is a far greater conflict occurring that stretches well beyond Carew's murder. Stevenson may be suggesting that Carew's murder is symbolic of a wider conflict in our novel. Hyde, the novel's symbol of evil, has killed Carew, the novel's symbol of civilization and virtue. Stevenson is suggesting that this event is part of a far greater conflict between good and evil. And that brings us to the end of our first idea. Stevenson presents London as a city that is shocked and in grief after Carew's murder. Let's now go on to our second idea. Stevenson presents Soho as a frightening reflection of the corrupt aspects of London. Throughout this novel, Stevenson has provided a dualistic perspective upon London. In other words, he presents London as a city with two different sides. On one hand, Stevenson presents London as a respectable and modern city, a centre of civilization and progress. On the other hand, Stevenson also presents the corrupt and unsavoury aspects of London. Now, we have already seen Stevenson present these two different sides of London in chapter 1. There, Stevenson described the pleasant-looking street as a symbol of the respectable aspects of London, and the sinister-looking building as a symbol of the corrupt aspects of London. Well, in this extract, Stevenson will again introduce the darker sides of the capital through describing Soho. Utterson sees Soho like a district of some city in a nightmare. As we're going to see, Soho represents the worst aspects of London. It is filthy, impoverished, and full of immorality. Let's firstly look at this district's appearance. Stevenson describes how the dismal quarter of Soho is full of muddy ways. Now, this description of Soho as dismal means that it's very dark. You can imagine that people who live in this neighbourhood's narrow, claustrophobic streets see very little natural light. And even worse, these streets are muddy and filthy. There is no one who bothers to maintain this area. Now, the physical darkness and decay of this neighbourhood are symbolic of a moral darkness and decay, as we're going to see. We can see one example of this moral depravity in Stevenson's description of the ragged children huddled in the doorways. These children are homeless. We can assume that they are huddled in doorways for warmth. The doorway provides the only means of shelter available to them. These children have nowhere better to go. In this brief description, Stevenson offers a heartbreaking image of this area's poverty. Next, Stevenson describes the many women of different nationalities passing out, key in hand, to have a morning glass. Now, Stevenson provides us with a clue about the identity of these women through describing how they are walking out of houses with key in hand. He is probably suggesting that they are prostitutes, walking out of their clients' houses having finished their night's work. Now, the fact that Utterson sees these women walking so openly out of these houses is a reflection of their shamelessness. They don't have anything to hide at all. Now, Stevenson deliberately draws attention to the fact that these women are from different nationalities. Why does he draw attention to this? Well, perhaps he is playing upon his readers' fears of people from other countries. He is suggesting that these foreign prostitutes are somehow corrupting London. Modern readers will hopefully find such stereotypes rather distasteful, but this sense of racial and national superiority was widespread in 19th century Britain. Stevenson also describes how Hyde's house is close to a gin palace. Now, these establishments were infamous in Victorian times. They were known as a place of drunkenness and prostitution. This was not the sort of place where respectable members of society would want to be seen. As you can see, Stevenson presents Soho as a place of immorality and corruption. Now, in Stevenson's day, the district of Soho was just as notorious as he depicts in this extract. It was infamous for its slums, crime, and prostitution. It was also used by many gentlemen as a place to secretly enjoy immoral pleasures. So it is fitting that the respectable Jekyll's alter ego should live in this den of sin and depravity. So why does Stevenson include this description in our novel? Well, maybe he's trying to challenge his readers' view of London. England's capital was widely hailed as a pinnacle of civilization and progress when Stevenson was writing. It was the centre of the British Empire and the Industrial Revolution. It was the most powerful city on the planet. But Stevenson uses this extract to reveal the corrupt aspects of the city. The nightmarish Soho represents the evil that lies hidden beneath the capital's respectable exterior. London might not be such a shining example of civilization and progress as it might appear. We've now finished our second idea. Stevenson presents Soho as a frightening reflection of the corrupt aspects of London. Let's now read through our two main ideas from this video. Number 1, Stevenson presents London as a city that is shocked and in grief after Carew's murder. And number 2, Stevenson presents Soho as a frightening reflection of the corrupt aspects of London. And now on to our final thoughts on this extract. Chapter 4 is a terrifying part of our novel. It begins with Hyde's barbaric murder of Carew. This incident shows Mr. Hyde at his most evil and violent. Hyde seems to be an enemy of everything that is civilized and good. But Hyde is not the only evil character in this novel. In fact, in this extract, Stevenson demonstrates that Hyde is merely a symbol of a wider evil that is present throughout London. In Soho, we see society at its worst. It is full of poverty, prostitution, and depravity. Through this extract, we see that society shares the very evil displayed most powerfully by Hyde. Hyde is merely a symbol of the evil that Stevenson witnessed across his society. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. You can see more Jekyll and Hyde videos on the playlist on this page. I will be releasing more Jekyll and Hyde content across the coming weeks and months. But for now, all the best.